Just a reminder that we're recording this session.
Right. Well, good morning and welcome, everybody. It's April, so as always, April showers bring May flowers, and in the space of this community of practice, hopefully we can all cultivate together. So this session, we will be basically looking at our financial education standards, topics 6 and 8, loan products and consumer rights. The scope of the series, I can't move my thing. The scope of the series is building connections and to collaborate, to refresh our understanding of standards and core content, to practice shifting the narrative in the context of the work that we do, and to explore ways to incorporate economic literacy as outlined in the IDA standards. Team, I am not able to move my deck, so should I stop sharing? I can't. It's not moving to the next slide. I apologize. Apologize, folks, having some technical difficulties. Yeah. Try again. Yeah. I don't know what's happening, but I can't control the deck when I'm sharing.
Yeah, it's all good. We can just keep going.
All right, cool. So moving into community agreements, just as a place to ground us, community agreements as a way for us to be able to lean into brave spaces and creating a space for equitable and inclusive conversations. We want to stay engaged, engage the tension and don't indulge the drama, speak your truth responsibly. Growth mindset as educators in this space, we want to lean into that and be open to learning and confidentiality. Take the lessons that are learned here, but leave the details.
So today we're going to focus on topics 6 and 8, which are loan products and consumer rights. And just a reminder that this session is not a train the trainer for you to teach the topic. The goal of these community of practice sessions is to think about economic systems that we and IDA savers operate in and better understand the complexities of these systems. We believe that this will strengthen the way we approach IDA financial educations. And so the slide actually has the 2 standards, but if you need a reminder what the standards are, you have those documents, and we're actually going to paste the link for those standards into the chat box so that you can actually view them again if you need to. So I'll go ahead and do that. So we're going to jump to a small group activity. And so in your small group, you're going to do self-introductions of with your name, your organization, and your role within the organization. And as a group, you're going to list as many loan products you can think of in the order of the most expensive to the least expensive. So we're talking about formal and informal loan products. No Googling or web searches allowed. And so you're going to be in the chat box, you'll see that Luke has put up a link and assigned you all to a group. And each group has a link to a specific Google Sheet. And so your group will work within your Google Sheet. You'll type in your answers in the yellow column. If you need to go over, you can, but try to stay within the yellow column. And remember, from the top to the bottom is most expensive to least expensive loan product. And before we let you go into your breakout groups, actually, Luke, are you going to tell them what group they're in?
Yeah, I can give a quick intro. So click on that last link that I sent. It should send you to a Google document, which then has names of everybody, the breakout group that you'll be in, and then the link, which is a spreadsheet. So the instructions are there. Take a minute to introduce yourselves, but make sure you get to the activity And we will then show all 5 groups the products that you came up with, that you got in the 10 minutes that you had, from most expensive to least. We'll show that. So we're all going to look at what you put into that Google Sheet after we come back. So kind of a race for the 10 minutes that you have to get as many that you can think of out there. So does everybody see that link? Get to the Google Sheets. You should find your name. You'll automatically be put into that group and you'll have 10 minutes. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, I've assigned a few of you last minute, so hopefully everybody makes it. There we go.
Welcome back, everyone. Great job on your brainstorms. What you see on the screen is we were able to have all of your spreadsheets feed into this master spreadsheet. So we can debrief by looking to see what you all put down. This is super interesting. So lots of answers. And it looks like a lot of you guys ended up with the same top most expensive ones. And then I think the order for most of them are similar and some of them are different. Does anyone, is there any group that wants to talk about why they put their items in the order that they did?
Technically, ours are not ordered the way we had it ordered. We created a second ordered list. So this
Okay.
was what we started with. This is the raw
Okay. All right. What group are you?
5.
5. Okay. Cool. So is there anything that stands out in your list that you would definitely move from where it is?
The order is completely different.
Oh, it's completely different. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
The Google Sheets are still active. So if you wanted to copy your correctly ordered list and paste it into that A column, it should update it on this too. Because I, for example, just fixed a typo in our list and it showed up.
Yeah, this is a live screen of what each of your groups has in that highlighted column. And we will share this later so you all can see.
Okay. So which loan products came to mind first and why? You can either share out or type your answer in the chat box.
This is Eric. I was in group 4, and I think, like, for me personally, I found that probably through my own personal history as well, but just like immediately first started going to like the loans and lending practices that were negative and with the negative connotations. And then by the end, I came around to like, as a housing authority, we have some really positive loans that have 0 interest that like help build, credit and, are, fantastic, very consumer friendly, non-expensive loans. So I found it interesting that I immediately, even when I hear the word loan, I start going straight to like predatory lending and, like payday loan stuff and pawn shops. And
that's something
that was
that you deal
interesting.
with on a daily basis. Do you think
Is that what?
Is that something you deal with on a daily basis, like clients who have to deal with that? Is that why?
Yeah, I mean, by the time they get into the FSS program, it varies, but I definitely have some that like if, like something happens over a weekend and they don't call me first, sometimes I'll have conversations where they're like, so I knew this was a bad idea, but I was like desperate. So I like got this crazy loan, like against my, and I'm just like, so yes, I think a lot of these loans are specifically targeting, people that are struggling, a lot of working class and lower income families are specifically targeted for these predatory lending practices. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to share about what came to mind first and why? Adriana says Tanda or Vaquitas. Is that how you say that? The community loans with no interest everybody puts their in their weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, and be a friend or a family member in most need will get the lump sum first. You've only done it in the family setting, but you see it in your Latinx community. Yeah. So are those the same as community lending circles? Is that the same idea, Adriana?
It is, yeah, really similar.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for sharing. All right. Kundinas.
That was the word I was looking for.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So let's move to the second question. Was there a loan product that someone else thought of in your group that you hadn't heard of? We can pop the list back up, Luke. Luke and I were having a conversation before. He's like, loan sharks. And I had to give him an example of like, going to the mob and, getting a loan at a very high rate with a lot of risk involved. I don't know if whoever put that in group one, if that was what they were thinking of as well, but that's what came to mind when I saw the words loan shark.
Yeah, I guess I sort of think of loan shark as like the, I don't know, the dude in a sketchy alleyway who gives you money and then he breaks your legs if you pay him. But I don't even know if those actually exist or if it's just in movies.
All right.
Yeah.
Was that?
Jeff thinks of the mafia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of brings up like bookies, but that's also more of like a gambling thing. And we didn't really, I don't really think of gambling as like loans, but it's also like becoming super prevalent with like, it's being advertised like constantly on ESPN, and it's technically maybe not a loan product, but.
Okay.
I
Don-
see that we're missing one that maybe I've missed it. When people take loans out against their retirement plans, their
Mhm.
401ks.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. Yeah. 401k loans.
The reverse mortgages.
Does anyone want to talk, like enlighten the rest of us about what a Shopify loan is? I've never heard of that either.
So both
Shop-
Shopify,
Go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say both Shopify and Square, a lot of the e-commerce platforms where clients are selling their products or their services through their online financial platform, they will basically advance funds, do a short-term loan that's repaid basically by taking the loan payments directly out of the client's sales. And they are typically taking a percentage of those sales, each day or each week or each month to repay it. So, which can be really helpful in some cases, but they're traditionally, higher amounts of interest and can really cause issues with the business's cash flow.
It can also, if someone is using that alternative form and it's coming directly out of their bank account or through their debit card, if they're not paying attention, it's like writing a check when you don't have the money in your bank account. If you don't have the money to buy it in the first place, then you shouldn't. But there's Klarna, Affirm, Uplift is used for travel. Yeah, Shopify is, and they're all just like that, where you're advancing money and it's a short-term loan. So it has its place, but it is higher interest rates.
Okay, we're actually going to touch on buy now, pay later in a little bit.
That's what it was called. We were trying to think of the name for it. It wasn't layaway.
Layaway is actually not on here, is it? I don't see
No.
it.
It's kind of gone by the wayside at a lot of places.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe 5 years ago, Walmart was doing it because people were going to like Walmart during Christmas and just paying someone's layaway off. I remember that being in the news. So thank you guys for participating in this activity. It's really interesting to see what you all come up with. So I'm going to pass it on to Luke real quick.
Yeah, so we're gonna show a video in a second, but we do have a little bit to sort of intro. We tend to assume that people who use fringe lending services do so because they lack the necessary information to make a different choice. Sort of the should or shouldn't, like they shouldn't do that, they should do this, that it's about information lacking. So we see part of our job as providing them with information so they can make better choices. But sometimes lack of information is the culprit, but we rarely think about what our clients have to overcome to make a more deliberate decision. So we're gonna show a very short video about, it's from Elder Shafir, who co-authored the book Scarcity. So he's gonna talk about mental shortcuts that people take when they're faced with a scarcity. A little bit of, I think, what Eric was referencing, you know, people who have a need and in a scarcity mindset, some of the mental shortcuts that allow them to meet those needs. So it's a short video and then we will continue on.
When you're preoccupied by managing your poverty and have less mind for other things, you make potentially mistakes in the things you're not attending to. It could be, you know, a sick child at home. It could be a big fight with your partner. It could be forgetting to pay the parking meter, which I get a ticket for and changes my week. You know, for the rich person, a parking ticket is annoying. For the poor person who's not remembering because she's worried about something else, that could change my whole week. Basically, what you're getting is that when I don't have enough and I'm preoccupied and I'm not paying attention, I make mistakes that cost me dearly. A classic mistake that the poor make is when they don't have enough and they need some money and there's a loan available, they take it because right now that's what they need the most and they're worried about other things. Those loans, if nobody's regulating them or capping them, could be at extremely high interests. The rich have automatic banking and automatic deposits and lawyers and accountants who remind them when tax time is. They get a lot of help. And paradoxically, very often as you go down the income distribution, as people are managing more, needing more help, they get less of it. Having access to banking, you know, makes a big difference. You know, if you're a woman in many places, if you come home with cash in your pocket, it's a question of minutes before it's not there anymore. I mean, somebody needs it badly, they beg you for it, they need it. Having a bank, having an account where it's not liquidity in your pocket makes a big difference to your ability to save, to manage it better.
There are dozens of heuristics worth exploring in the field of behavioral economics, but today we're going to take a closer look at the mere exposure effect. People have a tendency to develop preferences for things simply because they're familiar with them, which can result in suboptimal decision-making. Good decisions are made by evaluating all possible courses of action based on their effectiveness, not their familiarity. When deciding between alternatives, we shouldn't be choosing between a familiar option. We should be choosing the best option. So we all take mental shortcuts. It's our brain's way of saving energy by taking the path of least resistance. Maybe you can think of a time recently when you made a decision based on familiarity and convenience rather than evaluating whether it was the best option for you financially.
So because our brains take shortcuts based on what we are exposed to or familiar with, We need to recognize that people who live in low-income neighborhoods are disproportionately exposed to products and services that harm their physical and financial well-being, and the possibility that their families have a history of relying on certain strategies for meeting their needs. When we examine the physical communities that people with low incomes live in, we can see the real-life impacts of how this plays out. Lower-income neighborhoods have fewer supermarkets and traditional banks, more fast food restaurants, more convenience stores, and more fringe lenders. Suboptimal choices are baked into their infrastructure. And to the digital access and convenience of fringe products, add to that the digital access to fringe financial products, plus the stress of living with not enough. And you can see how the mere exposure affects decision-making. In the last session on credit, we shared studies that showed the prevalence of fringe lending institutions in a community greatly influenced by the default rates of borrowers, particularly borrowers of color. People with similar incomes and credit scores perform differently depending on the type of credit product available to them. Remember, focus on the quality of the vehicle, not the driver.
All right, so just a introduction. I know we had a little bumpiness earlier. So Randy Cordine, IDA program and training specialist. So since the beginning of the webinar series, we've been emphasizing thinking. Sorry, my computer is bugging today. I'm so sorry. Thinking of the role that systems have in one more time. The role that systems have in our personal finance and integrating economic literacy into your current practices. So if you hadn't been doing these things previously, doing it now is like veering off the ruts of a well-worn path, something we discuss in a different session. So our subconscious brain wants to stay on the original path of focusing on the merits of the individual effort because it takes our brain less effort to stay within that rut. If you're having a hard time making the switch, there's nothing wrong with you. It's normal to struggle against something that has become second nature. And similarly, when we introduce new information to our participants about better loan alternatives than what they are exposed to on a daily basis, we must recognize that they likely also have been traveling on a well-worn path that is hard to veer off of. So low wages, underemployment, unaffordable and unreliable childcare, food insecurity, and housing instability are daily realities that tax mental bandwidth. And when you remind yourself of the physical landscape and the intentional targeting people with low incomes are subjected to, it may no longer seem reasonable to expect them to suddenly become financially sophisticated after one class series.
So we're going to spend a little time pulling back the curtain to expose some systemic advantages that people with wealth have access to. But before we do that, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Julie Wong. I am a program consultant with Neighborhood Partnerships. Sorry, I didn't do that before. So one way the super wealthy borrow money is by taking out an SBLOC, which stands for Security Backed Line of Credit. So the idea is that you take out a loan against the value of your investment portfolio. You can think of this as something similar to a home equity line of credit where your investments are the collateral rather than your home. A good example of this would be Elon Musk borrowing against the shares of Tesla in order to buy Twitter. And if the share price of the underlying asset plummets, the bank can call the loan. So the benefits of an SBLOC is that it's pretty easy to get approved for this type of loan with little or no cost, and in many cases, low interest rates. There's flexibility in repayment, and these loans offer particularly tech employees the ability to avoid selling stock when the market is down, like it was in 2022, or up dramatically, as they have been in much of the past decade. So say, for instance, you work in a company where they only let you sell stock in a very specific time frame, but you need to come up with capital for maybe either a tax bill or a home down payment. This S block would allow you to take out money against your assets in order to meet those expenses. So for some people, they know that they're going to be in lower tax bracket the next year. And so they can access funds without selling and paying a higher tax bill. But in general, borrowers can access the value of their stock portfolio without having to incur taxes. You only owe to capital gain taxes when you sell an investment that has increased in value. So if you die with an S block, your estate has to pay the loan back, but your heirs benefit from the stepped up basis of your portfolio, meaning no taxes are collected on the appreciation accumulated over the lifetime of owning the asset until the heir sells it. So I'm going to give you an example of how that might work. So for example, if I bought $50,000 worth of stock and I own the stock at the time of my death 20 years in the future, and it's appreciated to $350,000, my heirs receive a stepped up basis on the value of the stock. So it's a total of appreciation of $300,000. If they sell the stock shortly after inheriting it for $350,000, they don't pay any taxes due on the appreciation. But if they hold it for an additional 2 years and it's appreciated another $20,000, they only pay taxes on that last $20,000. So if they hold it for a lifetime, their subsequent heirs receive the same treatment. If their account balance is sufficient, they can keep taking out S blocks without depleting the underlying asset. An S block allows the wealthy to generate income without having to pay taxes. And it has the potential to defer a tremendous amount of tax liability, a tremendous amount of tax liability through inheritance. This is one way that significant amounts of generational wealth is generated and preserved.
All right, I'm the last to introduce myself. I haven't done that yet. Luke Bonham with Neighborhood Partnerships. Use he, him pronouns. Based in Portland. I'm the IDA program manager. Welcome to everybody who's new to these webinars. We'll give you some information at the end of if you missed the first series that we did. We have a bunch of these, and this is a continuing journey. So this one is about financial products and consumer rights, but we are going to focus kind of for this next bit on financial products more broadly speaking, not just loan products, because there's been an incredible amount of innovation in this area, and not all of them would fall under the category technically of a loan. But they do have costs and benefits that we want to think about and keep ourselves informed of. We're just going to cover a few today, but as you encounter new financial products, we think there's two key questions you should be asking. One is, what need are they trying to meet? And two is, what, if any, regulation are they trying to bypass?
So the first product we're going to focus on is buy now, pay later. Like one of the previous folks said, there's companies, the most well-known ones that you see online all the time are like Affirm, Uplift, Klarna, but there's a bunch of them and you see them on the right corner of this slide right here. But generally the idea is it's short-term financing that allows consumers to make purchases and pay over time, not very long, usually about 3 to 6 months, and usually with no interest. And their value proposition to retailers is that through incremental sales defined as retail revenue generated because of their platforms that would not have occurred without them. So the idea is that the person shopping, say, online on Amazon only bought that product because they were able to break down those payments over 3 or 4 months, and that sale wouldn't have happened otherwise. The users of buy now, pay later services are far more likely to have bank overdrafts, payday loans, pawn loans, and other high interest financial products, indicating that they're more financially vulnerable than non-users of buy now, pay later financing. The CFPB has found that Black, Hispanic, and female consumers were more likely than average to use it, as were consumers with annual household incomes between $20,000 and $50,000. Buy now, pay later consumers may not be simply shifting their existing purchases to a new payment platform. They may be spending and borrowing more than they otherwise would. So there are definitely benefits to this program, this type of loan. Approval is really easy. Usually it's a soft credit check. And it won't affect your credit score unless you make late payments or fail to pay. The payments can be deducted automatically from your debit card, your credit card, or your bank account. And borrowers who miss payments may be prohibited from future use until they repay or they pay late fees. But those fees are relatively low in absolute terms and do not compound as does credit card interest. But the risks, and there are risks involved, is that some consumers are doing something called loan stacking, because when you take out a buy now, pay later loan from one lender, another lender does not necessarily know that you've taken out that loan because everyone's running soft credit inquiries. So there's no visibility into an applicant's borrowing activity on other platforms, and that can be dangerous. Buy now, pay later programs have features that encourage habitual use. So traditionally, you get introduced to these loans by surfing or shopping on a particular website, but once you've made a purchase through that website, they start sending you emails to go to their website. And their website has all the retailers that participate on their platform, and then they're marketing very aggressively to you through that. They're recording what you're interested in. They have rewards programs. They have discovery engines. They use behavioral economics types tools to enhance the features on their apps that are designed to maximize conversion and consumption. Paying off a buy now, pay later loan generally doesn't help you establish and build good credit. And if you want to return an item you bought through their platform, it can get complicated. So you usually can get your money back, but there can be a delay until the merchant informs the lender of the refund. And you may be required to keep making payments in the meantime. And if you don't, then the payment might be marked late or missing, resulting in added fees and possible ding to your credit score. So the regulations that they're dodging at this point is that most lenders don't provide standard cost of credit disclosures required by Regulation Z or periodic statements. They lack uniform billing dispute rights, leading to operational hurdles. So consumers are usually required to contact the merchant for a dispute resolution, and they're, like I said before, they're required to keep paying their regular scheduled payments until the dispute has been resolved. And so, say for instance, you were having that money taken out your debit or out of your bank account through your debit card. So you may be out that money that you might be needing to pay other bills while the resolution or the dispute is being resolved or the return is pending. A lot of these sites also use virtual credit cards to process the transaction. And so sometimes refunding the funds, it doesn't necessarily go directly back to your credit card. So it can be tricky to get that money back into your bank account. And the federal law on credit products mandates that consumers have a choice between or how they make their payments on outstanding debts. But most buy now, pay later lenders require borrowers to use auto pay, which may limit consumer choice and flexibility to elect or change payment methods or to skip a buy now, pay later payment to satisfy other financial obligations. So the next product we're going to talk about is earned wage access products. These are companies that like PayActive, Daily Pay, and Even. There's probably a dozen out there, but these are the most well-known ones. They partner with employers like McDonald's or Walmart to allow employees to get cash advances before pay period ends for a fee. So the fee is paid for by the employee who wants to access their the money from their paycheck. That's the cost of it's not a loan. They're only accessing the money they're already owed by their employer. So there's no interest involved. It's just a fee that sometimes it's monthly and sometimes it's per time you need to make a draw. So proponents of earned wage access products say that it's a tool to help workers avoid turning to high cost options like payday loans. And in contrast, there's not a credit check involved to qualify, so it wouldn't impact your credit score. These companies are not currently subject to Truth in Lending, which protects consumers against inaccurate and unfair credit billing, because technically it's not a credit product, but it's like a substitute for a loan product. Given that these tools are most commonly used among the lower end of the income spectrum, whatever can be done to increase, streamline, or standardize disclosures for these tools generally makes them more transparent to people who use them, the better. So before I move to the next slide, there are a couple questions on here. It says, is there any amendments in the works to regulate buy now, pay later? I didn't see any in my research. I know that you know, the CFPB has their eye on what's going on there, but there hasn't been any big movement to regulate that. So are these basically payroll advance products then? Then yes, they are. How they make their money is, it's unclear to me if the employers also pay a fee on their end. But pretty much universally, the ones that are offered through employers do charge the employees who want to use the product. So the fees range. Some of them, what I saw, were like $9 per month, and I don't know if that's just regardless of whether you sign up. And if you don't use it, if you still have to pay, it wasn't obvious to me. And because I think they disclose that to their employees when they sign up. So you have to be an employee to get the details. I wasn't able to find how, if you don't access it for a month, if you don't have to pay it. It seems like it might be some, like for even pay, I think it might be a subscription basically kind of thing where you just pay it every month regardless if you use it. Okay. Have any of you guys, before we move on, have any of you guys had any experience with either of these products or have worked with any clients who've used any of these products?
I've worked with clients who are job seekers, that for the ones that were the wage based, where they were able to purchase things that like clothing or shoes that were required for work and it came out of their pay. But there were specific retailers or catalogs that they were, required to use. So it was a deal that had been set up with the retailer, with their employer.
Okay.
So that was, something a little different. It wasn't necessarily a loan, but
Okay.
I'm sure that there was some charge involved.
So did you get the sense that the things that they were able to purchase were reasonably priced, or was it more expensive?
It was more expensive than if we had taken them down to Walmart and purchased it for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, little overpriced.
Yeah.
Some price gouging, it looked like.
Yeah.
So, but they were able to pay it back over multiple paychecks. So it was basically a loan.
Yeah. So a couple of things for this product, for both of these products, I went in very skeptical, not knowing a whole lot about, what, because you don't usually think these companies come up with stuff that actually really does try to benefit people. And I was surprised at how much I was just like, oh, there's no interest on buy now, pay later. That could actually really work out for folks if they were able to take advantage of it and not overuse it and overburden themselves. It could work out really well. And with the earned wage access products, I thought, that's definitely a better alternative than going to a payday lender for sure. However, it can trap people. If you're always having to draw money from your next paycheck, then you're kind of always stuck in that job. You never really get ahead. And so for these employers, what's happening is instead of addressing the fact that their employees aren't able to get by on what they're actually paying, instead of solving that problem, they're just making it so that, like slightly easier for them to access their money to smooth out the consumption. But for some people, it's problematic because maybe their ability to get that money may not be the best thing because they're not using it necessarily on the things that need to get paid for, but they're having like impulsive purchases because they're able to access that money. So there's that factor too. And so, in both of these cases, it does depend on the user and whether or not they're able to use these products to their advantage.
The earned wage access products, it sounds to me much like the company stores for the coal mines. Just a little more advanced.
Yeah.
Where, they can't afford to leave because then they're going to have this debt that they owe.
Yeah.
But their whole paycheck seems to be going to living paycheck to paycheck to just get by.
Yeah. Katrina's asking, how is that different than a credit card? Are you talking about buy now, pay later? The loans
specifically. Sorry, Julie. Yeah, specifically like buy now, pay later is it's just the same as if you used your credit card for somebody who has a credit card, because you are paying that back over time. The only difference is maybe, you're paying more for the product that you could have bought someplace else for the same amount of, for less or whatever, but you're paying more for the product. So doesn't it kind of equal out as like you're paying more for the product, and if you put on your credit card and the interest that you would have paid on your credit card? I mean, it just seems like they've taken the idea of the credit card and spun it to make it more accessible to people who have maybe not so good credit or something, and just kind of put that in a way that it's not being regulated. That's an issue for me, huge issue for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one way I could see the credit card, if you have access to a credit card, why wouldn't you use the credit card? The only reason I would say, like, okay, if you want to, maybe you're like this close from maxing out your credit card and you can't put the whole purchase on your credit card, but it makes more sense for you to break out that like $200 purchases into 4 or 5 payments over, like 4 months. You probably should, like, if you're this close to maxing out your credit card, probably shouldn't. But if you really need to make that purchase, then that becomes a better option. In general, though, these products aren't like, when I'm seeing these options on Amazon, they're not more expensive. They're the same price. The reason the companies are using this is that they psychologically, people are like, oh, I can afford that because it is a smaller monthly payment. And so the companies are like, well, we wouldn't have made that sale without that option there. And that's the reason that they're making this product available. But anyways, you're right. There are problems, and we should be looking out to advise our clients about whether or not it's a smart decision to make this.
Yeah, and maybe just to clarify, because they're not more expensive and there's no interest. So it's not a bad option if you do it once for something you really need. Because it's basically, hey, you can get it for the same price, you just pay it over 4 months. It doesn't cost you anything extra. But then the risk is it's a way to live beyond your means because you can buy all sorts of stuff you can't afford and then just have all these payments racking up, and it would be easy for someone, I think, to get into trouble.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we went a little over on time, so we're going to have a very short break. So let's break for 5 minutes and we'll see you back here in a few.
Break. And now we are going to focus on consumer rights in the second half of today's session, and we're going to do some more small group work. So we are going to break back into small groups, and each group will spend some time researching and discussing information on your assigned piece of legislation. So as you can see here, we're going to focus on, well, we've kind of prearranged or pre-selected those areas in which we want the groups to focus on, and each group will have one of the subjects being Oregon Payday Loan Regulations, Truth in Lending Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Oregon Deceptive Trade Practice Laws, and Military Lending Act. Something we want to call into the community of practice, just as it relates to some of the small group work. We have these guidelines for small group conversation leaders. So again, we're all learners in the space, leaning into our growth edges. A lot of us are new in this space, so these small groups can be building while also being asked to do work. And so we just want to provide some guidelines on how you can service each other or be leaders in the space. So try to be a guide rail, try to keep the group on topic. Remember, silence can be a tool as you're moving through things. The role is to fill the space and to bring forth other ideas. And if there are multiple questions, make sure all are addressed. Make sure there is one person in the group ready to share out, and try to phrase questions in different ways to elicit a response if nothing is coming out or there are long pauses in the group. Particular to this exercise, having one person to report out when we come back. So these are just guide rails within the space as you're working as a group to kind of lean into leadership. Anybody can step into it, multiple people can step into it, but just using it as a way to support the work we're going to do together. So each group will have a Google Doc, and you will have questions that will kind of guide you through the work that you're going to do together in your small group. And then when we come back, each group's going to have 4 minutes to present on what they learned. And as you can see here, we have some guiding questions. What were the conditions and the events that preceded this legislation or registration? Who are regulation, my apologies. Who were the primary advocates for pushing it forward? Who did it? What did it accomplish? How did it fall short? Who are the enforcers? What are the consequences or violations? What barriers exist to self-advocacy? And then again, within your groups, make sure you have one person to come back to report out. Each group will have 4 minutes to report out, and we will break you into your small groups and use Google Docs so that you're able to do that. So yeah, with that, we will paste the links and jump into it.
Yeah, so like last time, tried to be organized in this Google Doc link should give you a page. It's actually the same link as before. So I just brought back up the group names. Hopefully, mostly it stayed the same. If people dropped or joined, it might mix it up a little bit, but here's your group. Each doc is a separate link for your piece of legislation. So you can pop back into the main session if nobody in your group understands which document you're on, or you need some clarification, we can join in. I'm going to set up let's see, how much time do we have for this? 20 minutes. So let me get the breakouts going. And anybody have questions before I send you all out? Okay.
All right. Welcome back, welcome back. As always, we acknowledge that that probably wasn't enough time to have time to do all the things, but as always, we look forward to seeing what you produced in the time that you had together. So as always, just want to call in the community agreement in the protocol space of accept and expect non-closure. We know that in the 4-minute report outs that you may not be able to get to all the things. So just want to remind y'all that post this session, as is our practice, we'll send out the deck, we'll send out the video, and we'll send out the Google resources so you're able to access the combined answers for the 2 small breakouts that we did. So to the best of your ability in your 4 minutes, share responses that you have. Obviously, working in draft, it doesn't need to look a certain way. Do the best that you can. I would ask, we'll go in order of sequence with group 1 through group 4. I would just ask the reporter to share your topic and then share responses you have, and I will play the role of the timekeeper to try to keep us on track. So with that, I will call to the virtual stage the reporter for group 1 and ask you to introduce your topic and start your share out, and I will let you know when you're at time. Group 1 reporter.
Yeah, I was in group 1. My name's Adriana.
Hey.
And so we went through we did quite a bit of research and jumped from like OregonLegislature.gov. We found ustateleloans.org with like a kind of a timeline. So what were the conditions, events that preceded this legislation or regulation? We found that, people were living completely off payday loans. Some of these loans had annual percentage rates of 300 to 700%. There's a quote from the OregonLegislature.gov. The average consumer of non-bank payday loans takes out 9 loans annually and remains in debt for 212 days during the first year, which results in long-term indebtedness at a very high cost with significant financial burden. So it was nice to see these regulations put in place. There were also some victim stories that we had found on Oregon.gov, victims of unlicensed payday lenders. Who were the primary advocates that pushed the regulations forward? The Division of Financial Regulation stepped in and they capped interest at 36%. And some of the enforcers, the Division of Financial Regulation enforced maybe ultimately Attorney General and the Federal Trade Commission. And that's kind of where we got cut off. I am looking at some responsiblelending.org had some reports about, what the complaints were. And so CFPB has the power to supervise and enforce. And if anyone wants to pitch in, please do. I missed something.
Any additions from the group?
I'll just mention really quickly, thank you, Adriana, for covering this, but I'll just mention really quickly as far as some of the accomplishments with the legislation that went through the Oregon legislature was extending the minimum term periods for payday loans to 31 days, with the maximum being 60 days, and allowing up to 2 rollovers before there had to be a required cooling off period. So somebody couldn't continue to just borrow and reborrow the same money over and over again. And then as Adriana mentioned, with the 36% APR, that reduced the loan fees to, I think, 10% or less. I have to look at which source that was, but 10% or less of the amount that's being borrowed, with a maximum amount being borrowed
$30.
Yeah, and maximum interest rate is actually at 154%. But when you're talking about fees in a short-term time period, that APR can go up pretty quickly. So a lot of changes, and apparently that those changes resulted in 2/3 of payday loans stores closing in Oregon in 2007.
Well, thank you, Group 1, for all the research that you did in cultivating us in the space. And for the reporters, we'll move on to group 2. Group 2's reporter, if you want to step to the proverbial stage and mic, share your topic and your findings.
So my name is Leah Voigt. I'm part of group 2. We had the Truth in Lending Act, which basically requires the lender to disclose all the information about the loan. And leading up to it, we didn't find a single precipitating event, but the general conditions of loans and lending was that there were, customers were being taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial providers, and especially seeing a lot of that happening in the auto industry. And it was passed as part of Consumer Protections Act or package. And in terms of the advocates, we had Senator William Proxmire, as well as Senator Paul Douglas, who were big advocates in bringing it forward and trying to get it passed. And it did take 8 years from when it was introduced to when it was passed to do that. And they were both known or focused on consumer protections. In terms of what it accomplished, it makes it easier for consumers to shop around when they want to borrow, so that they can have all the information up front and in a standardized form as well. And it mandated specific APR calculations for all consumer lending. In terms of how it fell short, just because all the information is there doesn't mean that someone understands it and can make sense of it. We talked about the difference between right to know and versus right to understand in other consumer protections and for other protections. And so it's, loan lenders making things purposefully confusing so that technically they've shared it, but it's, it still doesn't make sense to the consumer. And also a lot of finding loopholes, whether that's using new terms to describe practices or doing new practices that circumvent the law. If it wasn't explicitly banned in the act, then going forwards and using it in other ways that really disservice consumers. And we talked also, we'll get to the consequences, but one of them is a $5,000 fine. And if you are a large financial institution, most likely, right, $5,000 is an amount that they can easily absorb. So in terms of a deterrent, it might not be the most effective. The enforcers are the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Federal Trade Commission. And the consequences are fines of up to $5,000 and 6 months or 6 months to a year in prison. And in terms of barriers for self-advocacy, you have to, it's a complex act. It was meant to be comprehensive. You have to know all of your rights before you can know that they've been violated and respond. And that complaints are often, like to the CFPB, the company is investigated and tried to be held in compliance, but that doesn't mean that there's resolution for the consumer who was wronged. That often that's a different pipeline or process, and that also, newer products that people have found a way around the rules. So consumers may not actually be protected when they're using those newer products.
Oh, well, thank you, Group 2, and Leah, for all the work and the research and sharing. We will move on to Group 3 if the reporter wants to step to the proverbial mic and stage and share out. And as always, if you want to share any of your findings in the chat, in addition to us sharing them, if you didn't feel like you had enough time, please feel free to access the chat. Reporter for Group 3.
That's me. I'm Susie McBride, Community Connection. And our topic was the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And kind of like the previous, we didn't necessarily see a single incident that preceded the legislation or regulation, but created because the protected classes, women, people of color didn't have equal access to credit, is what motivated this particular act. The advocates, primarily a large coalition of women and civil rights groups, got together and pushed to get this created. And it prohibits creditors from discriminating against credit applicants on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, provided the applicant has the capacity to enter into a binding contract. So those are all areas of disparity, if you will. How did it fall short? The original version didn't include sex or marital status. Sexual orientation isn't protected, and kind of found a lack of support for different languages for translation of this particular act. And the CFPB has regulation over that. And violations, if a lender is guilty of violating, they can be sued in court for damages, punitive damages up to $10,000 for individual lawsuits, and $500,000 or 1% of the creditor's net worth for class action suit. And some of the barriers we came up with, even being professionals, finding information can be difficult. So a consumer may, not have good access to this, even though this act is generally included with paperwork when people are acquiring credit. It's not necessarily explained. So again, knowing what your rights are could prevent you from realizing that you have been discriminated against. Not really knowing where to make a complaint. It's not super easy to figure that out as well. And then the way it's written, legal jargon can be confusing. Possibly technology barriers. A lot of times complaints are lodged electronically, and in our rural area, we see a lot of technical barriers. Does anybody want to add anything else? We had a quiet group.
Oh, no worry. You're getting some props in the chat, Susie. So thanks for sharing, and thanks for all the work you did, Group 3. We will move to close it out with the final Group 4. If your reporter wants to step to the proverbial stage and mic and share your topic and your findings.
Absolutely.
We do have there's a 5th group too, just FYI.
Okay. All right. Shout out to Olga. She found the awesome resource, background brief on the Unlawful Trade Practices Act that we used, which is the Oregon Revised Standard 646.605 to 656. Conditions that or events that preceded this legislation or regulation. In 2013, the Attorney General opened 98 formal investigations into Unlawful Trade Practices Act violations, and they had approximately 200 open and active cases at the time that the brief was written. This was 2014. Of the cases from 2013, 21 were against new and used car dealers, 9 against construction contractors, 7 against RV dealers, 7 against work from home opportunities. Of course, this was pre-COVID. Several investigations crossed state lines and involved multiple states' efforts. In 2013, the Attorney General resolved 40 of those cases through voluntary agreements, settled 7 cases out of court, and pursued 4 lawsuits in state court. So this was something that there was a big push on, obviously, to rein in these unlawful trade practices. Primary advocate for pushing it forward, of course, everyone who brought all the individuals who brought these things to the attention of the Attorney General, then the Attorney General's office pushed it forward. What did it accomplish? Unlawful Trade Practices Act is a tool that consumers can use to recover damages that occur as a result of deceptive sales or business practices. It codified what conduct was prohibited, and it wasn't just what unconscionable sales tactics are used, but also telephone and door-to-door solicitations, and put limits on those and what remedies that are allowed to an individual to recover any losses or any problems that they may have encountered. How did it fall short? It does not cover landlord or tenant disputes, business transactions with pawn brokers, or any insurance related matters. So that's where the shortcomings are on the Oregon Unlawful Trade Practices Act. The enforcers, it really comes down to the courts to enforce it. While an individual can bring an action for any specific acts prohibited by the statute, only a prosecuting attorney, a district attorney, or attorney general can bring an action for these more general unconscionable acts or tactics as outlined by the ORS statute 646.607. Consequences of violations, it's like a wrist slap. Actual damages or $200, whichever is greater, plus punitive damages and attorney fees. So again, depending upon who it is, what business it is that is conducting these unlawful practices, then, it may be nothing to them. It may be, common practice for them. What barriers exist for self-advocacy? The degree of specificity needed to show actual damages is still under discussion with the courts. Again, an individual can bring a suit, but it's really up to the court to determine what punitive damages are warranted. So there's not too much other than the possibility of a class action lawsuit coming into play, because it does allow for that. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank to you for reporting and to your group for all the work and sharing. And then we'll move on to the final group 5. If a reporter wants to step for Bio Mic and stage and share your topic and your findings.
I think our reporter doesn't know he's the reporter.
Oh, well, in
Hector,
that case,
there. You might have gone off.
okay. Well, does anybody from the group want to share or collectively share some of the findings?
Sure, I'll do it. So we had the Military Lending Act. The Military Lending Act, it's a federal law that provides special protections for active duty service members by capping interest rates on many loan products. The conditions or events that preceded the legislation was prior to it being proposed and enacted in 2006, credit card offers and loans targeted the military population with predatory loans that had punishing interest rates, fees and terms. To tackle the problem, the federal government enacted the Military Lending Act to regulate what lenders can and can't do when working with service members and their dependents. U.S. military had been heavily recruiting members that were active on the war on terror from 2001 to 2021, making this need to protect the military greater just because the sheer number of people that were being impacted by these predatory loans. The next question was, who were the primary advocates pushing this forward? The legislation has been endorsed by a wide variety of consumer, civil rights, veterans, service members, organizations, and advocates, including Consumer Federation of America, Military Officers Association of America, National Military Families Association, Veterans Education Success, and a whole bunch more. It was a national push. What did it accomplish? So this act regulates what lenders can and can't do when working with service members and their dependents. It limits the interest rates that may be charged on many types of consumer loans to no more than 36%. 36% seems really high, and provides other important protections. An example of one protection would be a creditor can't require you to create a voluntary military allotment in order to get the loan. No prepayment penalty. A creditor can't charge a penalty if you pay back the loan early. How did it fall short? It had limited impact on military credit card customers. The report from the Urban Institute in 2015 concludes that it did not lead to better credit and debt outcomes for service members and may instead have limited credit access to credit, and some service members, in other words, it was bad not just for, not because everybody was getting it, but also because some people were actually injured by it. The researchers concluded that broader expansion of the 36% APR cap beyond the MLA would be likely to improve credit outcomes for most borrowers and may limit access to credit to the most vulnerable consumers. Who are the enforcers? The Federal Trade Commission. It does most of the non-depository institutions and is part of an interagency group with whom the Department of Defense is required to consult for at least 2 years. What are the consequences of the violation? If a loan exceeds 36%, that 36% interest cap, or if the loan violates any of the other provisions, creditors that give you that loan could be subject to penalties under this act. Knowing the violation of the MLA is a crime punishable by a fine and up to a year in jail. Any promissory note or contract violating the MLA is void from its inception. The parties revert to the status prior to the loan. The borrower must repay the loan, but no interest can be charged. And any interest already paid must be returned to the borrower. Furthermore, if a suit brought by the borrower, the lender violating the MLA is liable to pay actual damages of $500 per violation. The lender may also be required to pay punitive damages and shall be required to pay court costs and attorney fees of the prevailing plaintiff. What barriers exist for self-advocacy? Some of the same things that we discovered for what are the weaknesses or shortfalls also came across as barriers. But one thing to know is that, military borrowers substituted short-term costly credit with less expensive credit card borrowing after this was implemented. And many loan products don't actually, aren't covered by this, including things like your mortgage or a car payment. So it had limited value. When we did look at the research on how the act was doing, it was not evaluated positively. It basically said it had little benefit and in some cases actually had negative benefit.
Well, thanks,
That's it.
Suzanne. Appreciate you stepping into that and sharing on behalf of Group 5. So we will close that exercise out. Thanks to everybody, and we will do our best to share the collective list and the resources post the session.
You all did an incredible amount of work in 20 minutes. It is really clear to me that all these pieces of legislation are super complex but worthy, and they should all be considered living documents, right? So they're all imperfect in their own ways, but several, one of the points of talking about who the advocates are was to show that they're actual people and not just legislatures behind these movements to push for change. And so, particularly with the Military Lending Act, you saw there's a lot of organized organizations that were pushing for this legislation. And regardless of whether or not it was effective in the end, because we can't always know if it's going to be effective, it's still important to recognize that these types of efforts take a lot of collaboration and organizing in order to make change. So a lot of times we take these pieces of legislation for granted, but it's important to remember that they're imperfect. People don't know what their rights are. People don't know how to advocate for them, even if they do know what they are. And so it becomes really complex. So I'm going to kind of speed through because we only have a couple minutes. A lot of you guys already know who the enforcers are, and there's a lot of overlap because what I want to point out is the CFPB is a great resource in general, but a lot of times there's legislation in Oregon that makes our laws here are more restrictive than they are on the federal level, and they like take priority over the federal law. So just because they would be able to get away with it if we didn't have that legislation, you should reach out. If you feel like there's a violation, you should reach out to both, like the DOJ, Oregon DOJ, and the CFPB. But anyways, we're running out of time. So I just want to let you guys know you did a great job, and we really appreciate all the work that you did. Hopefully you learned something and are motivated to learn more.
Yeah, so as we close, I wonder if Randy or Julie, you could paste the link into the chat for the evaluation, the form, just to help us know what we could do better, what you got out of it. This is the 6th of these that we've had. So if you missed any of the first 5, you can email Randy or I for links to those. We do have 2 coming up. One on debt repayment in a month, and then another one on taxes and investing. So we're working our way through the 12 standards topic by topic. And we have this resource document, which will also be where all the 5 groups that broke out to talk about legislation, where your notes are, the big activity that had this 5 spreadsheets, culmination of your answers from the first session. In there, that'll be in this link, which we can send out with the resources afterwards. So thank you for coming. Hope everybody has a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.